Right. Who's ready to learn? Who's ready to learn? Yeah, that's right. So, you want to be a front-end developer? That's what the class is about, by the way. Since nobody told you. So, what does that even mean? Front-end. What's the front? Yeah? True story. Like this? This is the front end? Front end versus the back end? No. No, that's not how they did that. That is not how they did that. Front end versus back end, right? No, of course not. I know from Google Images that front end is making pastel-colored, flat screens. That's front end development. That's what it says in Google Images. Sometimes it seems to me the really cool front end developers have little shields and logos floating around the screens. Yeah. Let's have a closer look at those little shields. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What do those three things have in common with each other? What do they have in common with each other that they don't have in common with these? And no, it's not an acceptable answer that the ones on the left are front end, the ones on the right are back end. What makes them different? What makes HTML, CSS, and JavaScript different from Ruby, Python, .NET, PHP, and Java? Yes, sir?
Those don't have their own console.
They might.
They're not programming language.
Oh, they're all programming language. Well, HTML and CSS are not. JavaScript is. So what do the three on the left have in common that they don't have in common with those? Anybody know? Probably, but putting it into words. Yeah.
This is just a guess, but can you not access the operating system? Or do
That tends to be true, but that's not always true. That's not what I'm looking for, basically. But yeah, I see what you're getting at. Do you have, Sadie, are you tempted to say something? You started to define it earlier. They all work together well? That is true. Tell me, you ever heard of these bozos? Browsers know just what to do with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Web browsers don't know what the cuss to do with Ruby, Python, PHP.NET, and Java. So one possible definition of the front end is that it's everything that web browsers can interpret without any extra help. If you want a more technical definition, front-end languages run on the client side, back-end languages run on the server side. Since we're talking about the web, the client side is the web browser. The client is always the web browser. So for our purposes, there are things that web browsers can run. Web browsers can't run any of that other stuff natively. So slow down there, Grandpa. What's this web business? All we know is the Snapchats and the Instas. I don't know what this World Wide Web sounds like. Something for old people, like people in their 30s. Gross. Well, what if I told you that very same World Wide Web is the very infrastructure that powers your beloved Snapchats and Instas? That's right. So let's talk a little about this so-called web and how it works. And pretty soon you'll be as comfortable with the web as this guy who thought his Palm Pilot and his 40-pound CRTs and his bulky cell phone 45-pound CRT displays would look cool much longer than they did. He also thought he would have hair much longer than he did. But then again, maybe don't listen to that guy. Or maybe do listen to that guy because he's me. That's right. I'm the guy in the picture. Whoa, what a surprise. This class is full of surprises. When you visit a website, you type a URL into your location bar or your search bar, and it sends a request containing such things as the URL you requested and the user agent you're using. In other words, which browser. That request hits that big cloud that we call the internet, specifically a little corner of that cloud called the World Wide Web, where it eventually reaches some kind of web server. On that web server, who knows what happens? Maybe it just takes the address you asked for, finds a file with the same name, pulls it back up and gives it back to you. Or maybe it runs a whole dang program in Java or Ruby or Python or whatever. And the output happens to be something that you can read. Whatever it does, we don't care. it sends back a response. That response hits your browser. And it's probably going to be one of those things that your browser can interpret without any help, like HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. So again, you send a request, it hits the server does who knows what. Maybe it runs an entire application, and the output of that application happens to be HTML, and it sends it back to you. It's probably going to be some HTML, CSS, or JavaScript that actually gets sent in the response, or maybe a cat picture. But other than that, that's pretty much it. It's one of those three things. I mean, your web page could play audio or video, but if you autoplay audio on a web page, you're basically no better than Spock, who is summoning Satan himself. I don't know why, but I found this GIF, so it must have been a thing. So anyway, it's probably HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or Little Bub. And only one of those things is a programming language. No, Little Bub isn't a programming language. It's JavaScript, your new best friend. Yes. So, front-end development is building all the stuff that gets sent in the response. All the stuff that web browsers will interpret and display, including, yes, dear old JavaScript. So, you want to learn more about JavaScript?
Yeah, sure.
Why?
That's what you
I hear it totally sucks. Oh my gosh, look at this. 35.5 million results for JavaScript sucks. And look at Casey, self-described master programmer down there. Why do so many people seem to hate JavaScript? Because it sucks. Silly question, right? Of course they hate it. Who doesn't hate things that suck? Sucks so much that 35 million pages devoted to its suckitude. So why use it? Reason number one, oh cuss, I hit the little stop doing the slideshow button. Pardon my language. So anyway, yes. Why? No, you can. That's true. It is a general purpose programming language. You can do whatever you want with it. Reason number one, you don't have a choice, really. If you want your stuff to run in the browser, it's still pretty much the only game in town. It's the only thing these bozos understand. Sure, you could write your front-end code in TypeScript or CoffeeScript or Dart or Elm or something, but only because they eventually get turned into JavaScript. JavaScript is still pretty much the only game in town. But reason number two, it's actually pretty good now. Some of those Google results were actually people mocking people who say JavaScript sucks just because they don't really know it. And it's true that there were some really unfortunate decisions made early on in JavaScript's history that we still have to deal with. But in many cases, people are just angry because it's not language X, whatever they're used to. It does say something that one of the most popular books about JavaScript is called JavaScript: The Good Parts, and it's not a very thick book. But a lot of people just don't like JavaScript because it doesn't behave like their favorite language. For example, here we have C and Java. They're both curly braces and semicolon languages. So is JavaScript. But JavaScript kind of looks like that, but it doesn't actually work like those languages, and that can lead to frustration. And back in the day, if you've been writing JavaScript as long as I have, it used to be truly heinous. But times are better now. My business partner, a guy named Miles, he created a Twitter account just to tweet this. This was his first tweet ever. He was so mad at JavaScript, he just had to create a Twitter account. He has tweeted many thousands of times since then. But his very first tweet was about how much he hated JavaScript. Yes. But that was 10 years ago, and frankly, 10 years ago, JavaScript was still pretty awful. And I think even he would admit it was largely because it wasn't Ruby and is pretty much the anti-Ruby, and Ruby's his favorite thing. So, but anyway, so now that we've established how terrible it is, who's still excited to learn JavaScript? All right, come with me on a magical journey to 1989. The Berlin Wall came down. Nintendo released the Game Boy. Batman and Indiana Jones were dominating the box office, and that was the last Indiana Jones movie they ever made. True story. Heck, 1989, even I had hair. It was a good time. And at the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory, this fellow, Tim Berners-Lee, invented the World Wide Web, and with it, the HTTP protocol and HTML. He created it for sharing scientific documents in hypertext, the HT in HTML. What's hypertext? It links documents together. that's still fundamentally what the web is. It's a series of links between documents. Now, those documents can contain a lot more than text these days. They can have images and video and all kinds of stuff. But in the beginning, there was only hypertext. So this was 89. Fast forward to 91, when they made the last Terminator movie that they ever made. I still had hair. Huh, who can tell what game I'm playing? Anybody know what game I'm playing? Close. Game. Yeah, that's the NES there, but... Anybody know what that is? Give you a hint. Doon 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 ba doon doon boom boom ba doodle doon doon dun 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 a doodle doon ba ba dun ba doodle dun. Super Mario Brothers 3. See the little P meter there doing the whole Tanuki thing. Yeah, that's right. Super Mario Brothers 3. Good times. But the point is, it's 1991. They made the last Terminator movie ever. I still had hair. And Tim Berners-Lee made his creation available to the world with a humble newsgroup post. He launched it with a line mode browser that ran on pretty much every system, as well as a browser with a graphical interface that ran on the Next Step operating system. He even had a built-in WYSIWYG editor. Anybody know what WYSIWYG is? What you see is what you get. In other words, as you edited, you could see what the page was actually going to look like. Yeah. So he made a graphical browser, but that graphical browser, which was named at the time World Wide Web without the spaces, but that was confusing, so he renamed it Nexus. That browser only ran on Next Step, the operating system for Next workstations, which were the brainchild of this turtleneck-wearing cusser who had been fired from Apple. But he would have his revenge. But anyway, point is, Next workstations, really freaking expensive, so this World Wide Web thing didn't really catch on just yet. Not all that widely used. Which brings us to 1992, when I suddenly had long blonde hair. And this fellow told Tim he was thinking of writing a web browser for the X Window system, which would run on a lot more Unix machines. And Tim said, good idea. So he made a new browser called, what was it? Viola! That's right, Viola, which you've never heard of. So Viola added exciting new features like tables, a scripting language for behavior, a syntax for style sheets, not the CSS we know, but still style sheets nonetheless. Pretty huge leap forward, but it still only ran on Unix, so not all that many people saw it. Fast forward to 1993, by which time I had become the single most awkward organism on the planet. And the Legal Information Institute at Cornell had made the first website about law. And lawyers were like, it's a Unix system. I know this. No, they were like, Unix, lol, what? And this guy was like, JK, I made a browser for Windows. And lawyers were like, hype. And this new browser, first graphical browser for Windows, was called Cello. Cello, that's right. Get it? Viola, Cello. Yes, Cello was the first web browser for Windows 3.1. This changed everything. Everything. Hey, web browsers, step forward if anybody remembers you. Not so fast, Cello. Because you see, at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, birthplace of HAL 9000, at the University of Illinois, these chaps, who were students at the time, developed a web browser called Mosaic. That's right, Mosaic. Oh my gosh! Wow, Mosaic was a legitimately big deal. Like Viola, it was a graphical browser for Unix. Unlike Viola, it was very quickly ported to Mac and Windows. And, very big deal for the time, it was easy to install and use. Installing software was a nightmare in those days. And more people were becoming curious about the web, so the fact that this thing could actually be installed easily made it the pretty clear winner. Plus, it added all kinds of new features. In some respects, it was a little bit of a step back, because whereas something like Viola had style sheets and stuff like that, Mosaic just did everything with new custom tags. So it was kind of a step backwards for HTML, but that's okay. It was the browser that caught on. It was a huge deal. So that brings us to 1994, when my nerdy friends and I still had hair. Those other three jerks still do. Life is not fair. And the information superhighway was all over the news. Information superhighway. That's all anyone was talking about. The information superhighway. We learned all about it on Channel 1 News. Anybody watch Channel 1 News in their high school or junior high? Yeah, Channel 1 News, right? Yeah, back then it was Anderson Cooper telling us all about it. Yes, he didn't always have white hair. And, yeah, it was about time for people to start trying to figure out how to make money with this new information superhighway. So you remember the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois? Well, they have a for-profit organization. They are the ones who developed the Mosaic browser from a few slides ago.
Yeah, I know it was at UI.
Yeah, University of Illinois. Yep, NCSA. So U of I actually has a company called Spyglass that is responsible for commercializing inventions from the university. And so they started working on a commercial version of Mosaic to try to make some of that money. At the same time, however, this fellow had graduated. And he took most of the Mosaic team with him and started a new company, and he called it Mosaic Communications. Until the NCSA was like, the name's ours, buddy. Can't call it that. So Mark and his friends gave their browser a new code name, suggesting that it would be the Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mozilla. Mozilla! Holy crap, I've heard of that one, Uncle Dave. That's right. Mark and his friends picked Mozilla as their mascot, but the browser itself ended up being called Netscape. Yes, Netscape Navigator was released in October of 1994, implementing a ton of new features and immediately rendering all other browsers irrelevant. So irrelevant, in fact, that what people started doing was configuring their servers to actually sniff out to make sure it was Netscape before they would even return a response. Irresponsible things to do, folks. Detect features, not browsers, because browsers change. Oh my gosh, what a pain in the neck. So remember the diagram that shows the request going from your machine to the cloud? So along with the URL and stuff, it also sends something called the user agent string that identifies your browser. And this was the one that was sent with Netscape 1. It identified itself as Mozilla, their code name. So people would actually configure their web servers to make sure that that appeared in the user agent string before they would even decide to send them back a document. It wouldn't just let the browsers trip on it. It would sniff them out. God, that's such a terrible idea, folks. We'll come back to that. So meanwhile, Spyglass at the U of I was licensing their version of Mosaic to who? Not Paul Rudd. Microsoft. Oh, cuss. Player 3 has entered the game. That's right. Microsoft put a team of 6 to work enhancing Spyglass Mosaic and giving it that Microsoft flavor. That's right. Bill Gates can jump over office chairs. So that brings us to 1995 when my hair reached its maximum strength. And I don't know. It looks like I did a cover shoot for Young Republicans Quarterly that I've forgotten about or something. I don't know. It's just a picture. Anyway, Turtleneck Guys, other company, made a movie about toys. Alanis Morissette was ticked off about one thing or another. And Bill Gates was the master of the universe. And he and his start menu were so exciting. And he and his pals at Microsoft were ready to show off their fork of Mosaic to the world. You know it as a miserable pile of garbage called Internet Explorer, available in the Microsoft Plus companion for Windows 95. Now, IE at this point was pretty much just the original Mosaic dressed up like Windows 95 and didn't have all the features of Mozilla, of Netscape. The Netscape folks have been busy adding lots of new features, and Internet Explorer didn't even support tables in that first release. They didn't even have that blue E icon yet. They just labeled it the Internet. And seriously, forget what you know about newer versions like IE 11 or Edge. In those days, the first 2 versions of Internet Explorer had no redeeming features. They were terrible. But everyone just used the browser that was on the floppy that their ISP provided anyway, and that was virtually always Netscape. In fact, guess what? This is how Internet Explorer identified itself. Mozilla, with the truth in parentheses, MSIE. Mozilla, I mean, compatible, right? So this stupid situation has led to this. This is what modern browsers look like. No kidding. They all do this. Look at that. Oh, you're looking for Mozilla? Yeah, that's us. Oh, you're looking for WebKit, Apple WebKit engine? Yeah, right. That's us. Okay, HTML, you're looking for the Conqueror browser for KDE on Linux? Sure, that's us. Oh, Gecko? We can do Gecko. That's Firefox. Yeah, Gecko. Of course, we're Gecko. Oh, you want Chrome? Yeah, I'm Chrome. What are you talking about? I don't even know. I'm Chrome. No, just kidding. I'm Edge. I'm the guitarist for U2. That's me. Anybody want to guess what browser this actually is? It's Edge. This is the user agent string for Edge. But they all do this. They all put everything in there because just in case some idiot is sniffing for a user agent string, it's going to match them all. So don't do that. It's useless. Yes, sir.
Why did they quote unquote sniff out?
Developers did that as a way to try to keep incompatible browsers from reaching their stuff. But let them worry about that. The browsers will get updated, and you probably won't update your server. It's just a terrible idea. Feature detection is a lot easier than it used to be, so detect features if you must, but also make stuff that degrades gracefully for older browsers. Progressive enhancement, folks. It's the way of the future. So anyway, I know you were promised JavaScript. We're getting there. Just bear with me. We're still in 1995 right now, when Generation X was the absolute worst instead of all of you. So don't feel too bad. They've been doing this forever. Look at this. Laid back, late blooming, or just lost. Can you believe Generation X moving back in with their parents? They've been doing this forever, so don't take it personally. Oh, we're killing America's soul. Kids today, killing America's soul. No, America's doing that. Anyway, Generation X, instead of you guys, were the absolute worst at that time. Well, that was also the year that the web became widely available, and the commercial web was a very real thing. Things like Amazon and Yahoo launched in 1995. CNET launched with this yellow sidebar that every site on the internet copied. You wouldn't believe how ubiquitous that stupid yellow sidebar became. And you really know something is catching on when the suits in Hollywood start trying to target it. Like, kids today, what are they in? Well, they're into being online. Oh, let's make a movie called Hackers. Boot up or shut up. It's coming out this fall. No, online this fall. Oh, the kids won't be able to resist online. It sounds so hip. Yeah. And meanwhile, there were new tricks like tiled background images and GIFs, which were clearly a fad and have no place on today's internet. But whatever. GIFs. The creator at Comp called it GIFs, so I like to do it. Anyway, folks making the web, they wanted more than just little spinny X-wings. They wanted actual interactivity on their page. And the answer came in the form of browser plugins like Adobe Macromedia Shockwave and QuickTime VR, and all that kind of stuff. Incredibly, Shockwave is still maintained by Adobe, and even more incredibly, the Space Jam website is still online. That's right, 20-some years old. So we had interactive content. We even had games right in the browser. But interactivity via browser plugins was still a pretty miserable experience. The plugins had to be installed, they were a security risk, and they were painfully slow, and they couldn't actually interact with the contents of the page. They kind of ran in their own separate space. Luckily for us, a team of scientists at Netscape Communications were working on a scripting language that would run directly in the browser. Okay, they weren't scientists. Okay, it was one guy and he did it in 10 days. Brendan Ike. So, he spent a whole 10 days on it. What was it? You guessed it. Mocha! That's right. That's what his boss, this guy again, told him to call it because he really, really wanted to remind people of that other thing that was named after coffee that came out around the same time. So, but a few months later, before they'd actually released it to the public, in September of 95, they came up with a better name. And finally, we had LiveScript. Okay, that name didn't stick either. When it was finally released in December, they made a trademark licensing deal with Sun Microsystems, the folks, the trendiest new platform in town. A trademark licensing agreement that confuses people to this day. And thanks to that, Netscape could call their new scripting language JavaScript. That's right. Remember, Java is to JavaScript what car is to carpet. Only the most superficial of similarities. It's just a name. Java is not JavaScript and vice versa. But JavaScript now existed and could be used far and wide. At least if you had the very latest version of Netscape and had it turned on in your preferences. But JavaScript had arrived by golly, and because the name JavaScript wasn't confusing enough, when Microsoft inevitably reverse engineered it for Internet Explorer, they called it JScript. So, with me so far? So over the next couple of years, an organization called ECMA, that's the European Country Music Association. No, I'm just kidding. It's the European Chamber Music Academy. No, I'm just kidding. It's the European Cylinder Makers Association. No. It's the Étude de Conception de Machines Automatiques. No? No. It's the Electronic Collar Manufacturers Association. All right. This joke has run its course. Obviously, it's the East Coast Music Association. Canadian music, East Coast style. That's what I'm talking about. That's right. Okay. It was ECMA International, the European Computer Manufacturers Association, and their standards body. And over the next couple of years, they worked on standardizing JavaScript, and they called it ECMAScript. That's right. So for the last 20 years, ECMAScript is the official standard of which JavaScript is the primary implementation. So when we talk about the standard, it's ECMAScript. When we talk about the language, it's JavaScript. So with our names established, the question is, what could JavaScript actually do in those days? HTML could define content in its basic presentation, but JavaScript could dictate behavior. You could do real programming with it. You could use JavaScript to alter the contents of a page, even generate new HTML. You could make images change by hovering your mouse over them. Bonus points if you had no idea what they link to until after you hovered. Like here, hover over any of these inscrutable images on the left, and you might get to another page. You won't know which one until you hover over it. This was terrible. This is called Mystery Meat Navigation. The good news is this website is buried on an external hard drive where you can't hurt anyone anymore. I mean, I don't know how it got on that external hard drive. No one I know would have made this in 1999. But anyway, if you were a bank with a ridiculous skeuomorphic design, you could do things like add a calculator, maybe even a mortgage calculator. That's right there on the page. How terribly useful. So this one isn't online anymore either. Somehow it ended up on my external hard drive. But besides calculators and the ever popular mouse over images, you could do things like client-side form validation. You could look at what people had typed into a form before you even made the trip to the server, save them some time, tell them they screwed up. Now, then as now, it is not sufficient to do client-side validation. Always make sure you check on the server. But client-side validation was a really great usability thing. But as with any new technology, there were those who would use JavaScript for evil. Yes, with JavaScript, the pop-up ad was born. Gee, thanks, JavaScript. Yes, everything was terrible. The web was becoming a nightmare, not just because of pop-up ads, but because an increasingly large number of sites only worked in one browser on one platform. See, in those days, Netscape and Internet Explorer didn't just compete on user interface features. They each added their own non-standard HTML elements and other features. IE had Marquee. Netscape had Blink. Our lives were enriched. Competition had fostered such innovation. No, folks, it was terrible. And both browsers had significant market share and had implemented wildly different object models. IE had document.all. Netscape had document.layers. If you tried to do anything, you had to write it twice because they were just completely incompatible. So welcome to the first browser war. If you were really cool, you put little animations on the page to let it know which browser they should download. So aside from totally different APIs for JavaScript, each browser had major features that were just plain absent in the other. Internet Explorer, for example. Internet Explorer 4.0 was bundled with Windows, which led to an antitrust lawsuit that Microsoft lost. But anyway, very quickly after bundling with Windows, Internet Explorer became the most widely used browser by far. But at least Spyglass was getting paid, right? At the University of Illinois. Haha, just kidding. No, see, because Microsoft bundled it with Windows for free, they didn't have to pay anything. Okay, they got sued, and they settled for a measly $8 million. But anyway, Internet Explorer began to dominate, and it introduced its own features, such as ActiveX, which allowed native compiled Windows code to actually run in a web page. That obviously opened up a lot of possibilities as long as you were willing to ignore every non-Windows user, which many businesses were perfectly willing to do. The web was starting to just become another delivery mechanism for Windows code. And thanks to the fact that Outlook Express was also included in every copy of Windows and used the Internet Explorer engine to display messages, email could run native code. What could go wrong? Lots of crap went wrong, and computer worms did billions of dollars in damage. And sometimes just previewing a message was enough to wreck everything. So what were we talking about again? Oh yeah, ActiveX. Right. So ActiveX, new feature in Internet Explorer. So why do companies use it since it broke the internet and was catastrophically insecure? Well, ActiveX did do some cool stuff. It offered some enticing behavior, including one really neat thing that would eventually catch on in a standard form, standard pure JavaScript form, namely XML HTTP request, aka XHR. It made its debut in Outlook Web Access for Microsoft Exchange 2000, and it allowed a web page to get additional data from the server after the page loaded without refreshing the entire page. Despite the name, the data was not limited to XML. In fact, XHR really had nothing to do with XML. It was just a catchy name. It's just a mechanism for asynchronous requests. You may have heard of XHR by another name. In 2005, Jesse James Garrett of the company Adaptive Path wrote a blog post describing a model for developing applications with XHR. He called it, what? Ajax! That's right. So in those days, we still had wildly different syntax for this and even basic operations that dealt with the contents of the page. So they called it DHTML in those days if you tried to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together. D for dynamic. It was terrible. Everything worked differently in different browsers. Thankfully, Netscape was about to go away. It was under half a percentage point of the browser usage. And Microsoft was starting to get serious about supporting standards, but old versions were hanging around for an awfully long time. And meanwhile, out of Netscape had sprung the Mozilla project, and we had Firefox, and it was built from the ground up to do standards. But anyway, we had to use these huge libraries if we wanted stuff to be cross-platform, and it was just awful. The libraries were huge, so visitors to your site had to download all this extra library code. It was painful. Thankfully, 2006, we had some new libraries like Prototype, jQuery, and MooTools that handled cross-platform compatibility in a much more pleasant way, including things like Ajax. New challengers have since arisen, and they all do their best to implement standards and to keep themselves up to date even. They even have nice built-in tools for developing JavaScript, which we're going to use. HTML5 offers new APIs that we can use with JavaScript to do some new things, as well as to do some old things faster. And JavaScript itself got a major overhaul with ECMAScript 2015, aka ES6. And lucky you, we're not going to mess with anything older than that. So we are all ES6 and newer all the time. You're welcome. Thank me later. And there are about 1 million new libraries and full-blown frameworks that let us build fancy JavaScript apps. We're going to use React, the third one there, the one that looks like an atomic thing. Now, as in the old days, ancient versions of Internet Explorer remain the hardest for front-end developers to deal with. There's still a shocking number of computers running Windows XP, and Internet Explorer 8, which is 8 years old now, was the last version to support XP. So if you have to support those folks, that's what you got to do. I even have a client who uses IE7. So that's Windows XP SP1. If they never upgraded past that, they wouldn't have it. It's a hospital, and they had old stuff that depended on the ancient version, and there's just nothing they could do about it. Okay, former client. I don't have to mess with it anymore, finally. But stuff like this happens. Internet Explorer, of course, eventually earned a bad enough rap that Microsoft dropped the name and now calls their browser Edge. But all the modern browsers are pretty okay for our purposes. I'm going to recommend Chrome for this class because I'm most familiar with its developer tools. The Firefox developer tools are also great, but I don't really know how to use them. So I'm going to be demonstrating the Chrome developer tools. And whatever you use, you need to know your developer tools. So I'm going to encourage you to use Chrome because those dev tools are awesome, and I'm going to show them to you. But everything we build in class should work in any of the big 4 browsers. So no one knows for sure what the future holds, but the future of front-end development looks pretty bright. It's taken a while to get here, but it's a pretty exciting time to be creating things for the web, and JavaScript itself has never been better. Are you with me? Yeah. Get psyched! Woo!